A superhero movie might seem like a guarantee, but there are plenty of vigilantes that never manage to recoup their production costs. These heroes couldn't save their own movies at the box office. After Superman 3, Christopher Reeve felt content with his tenure as the Man of Steel and considered hanging up the cape for good. Unfortunately for Reeve and anyone who saw 1987's Superman 4: The Quest for Peace, that wasn't what he decided to do. When Superman goes to the UN and informs the representatives that he intends to destroy all nuclear weapons, the reps give him a standing ovation, rather than unite against him. But Lex Luthor isn't quite done with Superman. By attaching a strand of the Kryptonian's hair to a nuclear missile and launching it into the sun, Lex creates Nuclear Man, a villain who looks like he was kicked out of a hair metal band. The budget of Superman 4 was $17 million, and it made less than $16 million domestically. By comparison, 1978's Superman made over $130 million stateside, Superman 2 made $108 million, and even Superman 3 had a domestic gross of nearly $60 million. John Cryer, who played Lex's nephew Lenny, claimed that Superman 4 suffered from a budget whittled to nothing. And Reeve said the same thing in his 1999 autobiography, Still Me.
No pain, no gain?
When you take a look at all the superhero movies that have bombed in the past, you can see a bit of a pattern. Superpowered comedies have trouble breaking even. That's a lesson Damon Wayans learned the hard way with 1994's Blankman. Wayans is Daryl Walker, a technical genius who's completely naive about the inner-city neighborhood he's grown up in. When mobsters murder his grandmother, Daryl uses his technical expertise to become the laughable hero Blankman. In spite of his skill at making useful gadgets, Blankman is less adept at crafting a uniform, using ordinary clothes soaked in a special bulletproof formula rather than designing a costume from scratch. Eventually, his brother Kevin joins him as sidekick Other Guy. Few people bothered to show up for Blankman. Its opening weekend gross was a disappointing $3.7 million, which made up almost half of what the movie would ever make on the screen. Its lifetime gross was less than $8 million. Naturally, critics were quick to mock the film with its own title. The San Francisco Chronicle opened their 1995 review of the film's home release with, "The title Blankman should be warning enough. There's nothing there."
Slap me around and call me Susan.
When it comes to box office bombs, Shaquille O'Neal is no stranger. While his most famous film appearance is most likely his title role in the poorly received genie comedy Shazam, Shaq took another swing at film stardom a year later when he was cast as John Henry Irons in Steel. It was an even bigger failure than Shazam. Writer-director Kenneth Johnson told Vice he was against the idea of Shaq as the lead from day one, but the studio wouldn't budget for an actual actor. Still, Johnson said that the story of Steel's background appealed to him, as did the fact that the film would bring the world one of the first black superheroes on the big screen. In a twist of fate, Spawn's Michael Jai White would beat O'Neal to become the first black actor to portray a major comic book superhero in a film by 14 days. Steel was released on August 15, 1997, while Spawn hit theaters on August 1st. Just as Johnson predicted, Shaq was no Man of Steel. Critics hated Steel, and audiences probably would have hated it too if they'd bothered to see it. Despite a relatively small budget of $16 million, Steel made back a little over a tenth of that. In 1999, there was every reason to think the superhero comedy Mystery Men would be a hit, considering the cast. Ben Stiller starred as Mr. Furious, a team leader with some questionable super credentials, and he still had fans repeating lines from the previous year's comedy smash There's Something About Mary. Hank Azaria, appearing as the cutlery-wielding Blue Raja, was a regular fixture on The Simpsons and the popular sitcom Mad About You. Greg Kinnear made a brief but memorable appearance as Captain Amazing, and he was still riding a high from 1997's As Good as It Gets. Jeffrey Rush, still fresh on everyone's mind from Shakespeare in Love, played the perfectly named supervillain Casanova Frankenstein. With the support of Paul Rubens as a hero who fights with flatulence and Smash Mouth's All-Star on the soundtrack, what could go wrong? Apparently, plenty could go wrong. Mystery Men required close to $70 million to make, and its lifetime gross was just $33.5 million. In spite of its comedic star power, many weren't convinced. Roger Ebert wrote in his review, "Mystery Men has moments of brilliance waving their arms to attract attention in a sea of dreck. It's a long, shapeless, undisciplined mess. And every once in a while, it generates a big laugh."
We're not your classic superheroes. We're not the favorites.
We're the other guys. We're the guys nobody ever bets on.
No one outside the cast and crew of the specials knows exactly how much the film cost to make, but considering that it was only released in 2 US theaters and made a lifetime gross of just over $13,000, it's safe to say that it probably didn't make a profit. Future superhero movie legend James Gunn wrote and starred in the film, and what little we do know about its behind-the-scenes mess comes from the DVD's commentary track. Gunn admits his displeasure with director Craig Mazin for not understanding his vision, and blames Rob Lowe for supposedly trashing the film. He also got into a fistfight with Jamie Kennedy outside an Astroburger.
Are you Minuteman?
Minute Man. Do I look like a soldier from the Revolutionary War? No! I turned small! Think!
While The Specials is seemingly a superhero movie, there's no action, no adventure, and no stunning special effects. Instead, the film is meant to be something of a mockumentary following the members of a D-list superhero team on their day off. The few reviews that The Specials received weren't glowing. Nikki Tranter of Pop Matters wrote, "The film is like a Saturday Night Live sketch, with most of the actors completely overdoing every scene." Selina Kyle, the Catwoman of the comics and most of the movies, would probably admit that when it comes to robbing the rich of Gotham City, she does it more for the thrill than for the money. That's a good thing, considering that the stinker of a movie bearing her superhero name lost $20 million. Catwoman deserves its honored spot on any sensible worst superhero movie list you could find, and even many of the people who made it agree, including star Halle Berry herself, who called it god-awful. With a lead character named Patience Phillips instead of Selina Kyle, a setting nowhere near Gotham City, the presence of magical cat powers, and not a single whiff of Batman, it doesn't seem like the writers bothered to read any of the comics. Countless critics would rather clean out litter boxes with their own toothbrushes than watch Catwoman again, citing horrible direction, a confused screenplay, and of course, Barry's ridiculous outfit. This disaster of a costume was designed by Angus Strathy, who earned an Academy Award for his work on Moulin Rouge a few years previous. He didn't win anything for Catwoman. Zoom stars Tim Allen as Captain Zoom, a washed-out superhero bitter about the loss of his powers to his teammate-turned-nemesis Concussion. When scientist Dr. Grant discovers Concussion is returning to threaten the world, he recruits the former Captain Zoom to train a new batch of pubescent recruits. Based on the 2005 children's book Amazing Adventures from Zoom's Academy, Zoom tried to ride the coattails of the budding success of superhero action flicks. More specifically, it was likely trying to share the spoils of the previous year's Sky High, which featured teenage heroes in a school made especially for young superpeople. Unlike Sky High, though, Zoom forgot to make money. Its $75 million budget returned a $12.5 million lifetime gross. And according to most of the people who actually did see it, it deserved its huge loss. The critical consensus for Zoom was that it was boring, bland, lazy, and unoriginal. As the New York Times wrote, "Too infantile for tweens and too stagnant for tots. Zoom bleeds boredom from every frame." Going straight from making comic books to movies is a big leap, but if there was ever anyone who seemed up for the task, it was Frank Miller. Miller's work on the page had been adapted into several hit movies. Sin City and 300 were based on his work, and his classic graphic novels Batman: The Dark Knight Returns and Year One were given life through animation. Christopher Nolan's Batman Begins was heavily influenced by Miller's work, and Netflix's Daredevil definitely wouldn't exist without it. Miller directed a film on his own for the first and only time when he adapted The Spirit, a comic written by his friend Will Eisner. Unfortunately, the story of a cop who rises from the grave to fight injustice and defend his city had critics and audiences agreeing that Miller should have stayed in his comfort zone.
I'm gonna kill you all kinds dead. I had you beat like eggs. Heck you did.
Variety estimated that the film's poor showing at the box office represented tens of millions of dollars in losses. But rather than become a cult classic, The Spirit has mostly been forgotten. There are some actors that you might think were born to play superheroes, but Rainn Wilson probably isn't one of them. The man who brought Dwight Schrute to life in The Office is no Chris Evans or Henry Cavill, but James Gunn saw potential for greatness when he cast Wilson as mild-mannered Frank Darbo in 2010's Super. Frank is a lonely short-order cook whose sanity takes a hard left turn when his wife Sarah leaves him for a criminal strip club owner. Inspired in part by a Christian TV personality who calls himself the Holy Avenger, Frank grabs a monkey wrench and becomes the Crimson Bolt. He'll beat you half to death if you're a sexual predator, or if you cut in line at a theater.
Shut up, crime. Here's the Crimson Bolt. Crime.
Critics didn't hate Super, but they sure didn't love it. Most felt that the film didn't really know what kind of movie it wanted to be or what it was trying to say. Super was an independent film that was never meant to set the world on fire and never expected to. But it didn't even manage to earn back its meager $2.5 million budget. In fact, it never even crossed the $1 million mark. The 2005 version of Fantastic Four and its 2007 sequel are far from perfect films. But the 2015 reboot makes the originals seem like The Godfather Parts 1 and 2. Director Josh Trank's poorly received origin story actually did make money when it went overseas, but it did horribly in the States. With a $120 million budget, Fantastic Four raked in a little over $25.5 million on opening weekend and scraped together a total of $56 million before U.S. theaters had seen enough. Rather than a fully developed superhero action film with an engaging story, the movie that some call fan-four-stick didn't live up to its name. As The Hollywood Reporter's Todd McCarthy opened his review, Fantastic Four feels like a 100-minute trailer for a movie that never happens. As one horrible review after another rolled in, Trank tweeted that his version of the film had been altered by Fox. However, unnamed sources from the film's production told THR that Trank was erratic and isolated, giving the studio little choice but to step in. Producers Simon Kinberg and Hutch Parker took the reins at the 11th hour, just 3 months before opening, to make sure there was actually something to put on the screen. Rebooting Hellboy after the enormously popular Guillermo del Toro films was always going to be a difficult task. But the 2019 take on the beloved comic was even more disappointing than skeptical filmgoers anticipated. This version of the character was reimagined as a wannabe Deadpool who engages in lots of monstrously cheap-looking fight scenes and makes even worse jokes.
Who you calling monster, pal? You look in the mirror recently, Scarface?
Is that meant to be humor?
Maybe. My therapist does say that I rely on jokes as a way to normalize.
Unsurprisingly, audiences weren't very interested in a take on Hellboy that had such an off-putting vibe. Released just 2 weeks before Avengers Endgame redefined the level of success superhero movies could experience at the box office, the 2019 Hellboy only grossed $21.9 million at the domestic box office and accumulated a pitiful $33 million overseas. Considering it was made on a $50 million budget, the 2019 Hellboy was a catastrophic failure. It's no surprise why the David Harbour-led film did so much worse than the two starring Ron Perlman. It just wasn't doing anything particularly unique or entertaining. It didn't help that reviews were absolutely atrocious, which only hammered home a toxic reception. It was never going to be easy to do a Hellboy reboot, but few could have ever imagined it going as poorly as it did in 2019. The original X-Men in 2000 broke new box office ground by becoming the first ever Marvel movie to exceed $100 million at the domestic box office. It was a significant achievement that signaled how popular superhero movies could and would become with the general public. Nearly 2 decades later, X-Men: Dark Phoenix brought the big screen saga to a close with a box office flop that became the stuff of legend. While X-Men showed just how huge Marvel movies could be, Dark Phoenix demonstrated that even projects featuring well-known Marvel heroes can tank at the box office. Dark Phoenix grossed only $252.4 million worldwide on a $200 million budget, with just $65.8 million of it coming from North America. That was a haul roughly on par with the domestic opening weekend of X-Men Apocalypse from just 3 years earlier. It was also the first time that a proper X-Men film made under $100 million at the domestic box office, while cheaper R-rated flicks like Deadpool and Logan ran circles around Dark Phoenix. With these dismal box office numbers, it was abundantly clear that the end had arrived for the X-Men saga, with once a mighty big-screen franchise going down in flames. In March 2020, movie theaters around the world shut down in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. As soon as they closed their doors, speculation about when these locations would reopen began. Similarly rampant were rumors about what motion pictures would usher in the reopening of the big screen experience in the wake of this health crisis. In August 2020, brand new theatrical releases began to trickle into movie theaters, but they were far from the blockbuster titans that dominated the box office in pre-pandemic times. One of the motion pictures that dove into the treacherous world of COVID-era moviegoing was The New Mutants, which screened in late August 2020 after languishing in development hell. Given that there were a limited number of movie theaters even open in North America at the time, The New Mutants cratered at the box office, with just a little over $49 million worldwide. On a $67 million budget, it made nowhere near enough globally to turn a profit and came in far below any other X-Men project. Even without the presence of COVID-19, though, it was always going to be a challenge for The New Mutants to attract audiences with its unusual mix of horror movie scares and superhero movie antics.
I'll see you in the morning.
I'll see you in hell.
Under normal circumstances, a sequel to the 2017 film Wonder Woman would have been a box office juggernaut to be reckoned with. Grossing just over $817 million worldwide on a $150 million budget, Wonder Woman was an incredibly lucrative enterprise that also drew an enormous amount of positive goodwill from the general public. People were clamoring for more Diana Prince. But the sequel arrived in theaters on Christmas Day 2020, at a time when the COVID-19 pandemic had shut down a significant number of multiplexes in North America. It also hit HBO Max on the same day it was released in theaters, a move that shattered its box office potential. Unsurprisingly, the $200 million budgeted Wonder Woman 1984 was a box office non-starter, making just $169 million worldwide. It especially suffered in domestic markets, where it grossed only $46.8 million, less than half the amount that the first Wonder Woman film made during its opening weekend. We'll never know how much the promise of seeing Wonder Woman duke it out with Pedro Pascal's Maxwell Lord and Kristen Wiig's Cheetah would have attracted people to cinemas if there had never been a pandemic. In the history of superhero movie box office bombs, it's typical to see the biggest money losers also be critically savaged projects that have minimal fan bases. The likes of Dark Phoenix and 2015's Fantastic Four are not titles that people like even ironically. They're just big-budget disasters too devoid of creativity to garner significant followings. That makes the box office trajectory of The Suicide Squad a curious one. Critics were generally over the moon about James Gunn's inaugural directorial effort in the realm of DC Comics adaptations, but the movie itself was one of 2021's most sizable misfires at the box office. Costing a staggering $185 million to realize, The Suicide Squad took in only $168 million worldwide, a dismal amount that included a paltry $55.8 million from domestic territories. The decision to release The Suicide Squad simultaneously in theaters and on HBO Max did it no favors, but there was more going on here than just a botched release strategy. The marketing campaign was generic and somewhat confusing. Nobody was exactly sure if it was a sequel or a reboot, and a restrictive R rating kept some younger fans from seeing the film on the big screen. Positive reviews couldn't prevent The Suicide Squad from becoming a costly box office dud.
We're all gonna die.
I hope so. Oh, for sake.
Grossing over $367 million on a $100 million budget, the original Shazam was a very profitable project that showed the value of investing in mid-budget superhero fare. A sequel was inevitable, especially with the dense mythology of supporting players and villains from decades of Shazam comics. However, many factors, including the COVID-19 pandemic, led to Shazam: Fury of the Gods arriving a whopping 4 years after its predecessor first hit theaters. By this time, the superhero movie landscape had changed drastically, and the buzz of the original Shazam had long vanished. During its box office run, Shazam: Fury of the Gods only grossed $133.8 million worldwide, with just $57.6 million domestic. It was a disastrous haul, especially given the project's $125 million budget. In North America, the entirety of Fury of the Gods just barely outgrossed the domestic opening weekend of the original Shazam. Waiting so long to deliver a sequel didn't help Fury of the Gods, and an awkward March 2023 release date only made matters worse. Don't expect to see Zachary Levi put the red and yellow outfit back on anytime soon. In August 2022, Warner Bros. Discovery CEO David Zaslav publicly stated that The Flash was one of the best DC movies that Warner Bros. Had on its near-future release docket. So began a lengthy publicity blitz where Warner Bros. Execs hyped up The Flash as being a can't-miss movie event, something that was going to change superhero films forever. While this may have seemed like a smart way to drum up buzz for a tormented project, it only succeeded in creating a puzzling aura around The Flash. Here was a movie where all the positive publicity seemed to be coming from executives with a vested financial interest in its success. Despite the best efforts of WB, The Flash bombed hard at the box office. The whole affair cost at least $200 million to make, not counting the barrage of advertising. And it became clear pretty quickly that the film was beyond rescue. The Flash made approximately $55 million during its first 3 days, and things only went downhill fast after that. Whether it was a general sense of superhero fatigue or a response to the controversy surrounding star Ezra Miller, The Flash simply failed to hit the ground running.